Hey Steve, thanks for joining us on Time to Show Up. It's great to be talking with you today.
A big
Thank
warm
you for
welcome.
inviting me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we're going to start with a very direct question, which is if you are able to say something about yourself, to describe yourself to someone who's never met you, about who you are as a person, what would you say to them?
Oh my God. Okay. What would I say to them? Describe myself now to someone who's never met me. Um,
Yeah, not
I
in the
find
resume
this.
fashion, right?
Yeah. I think I'm still somebody who is kind of struggling in terms of, but I am getting to know myself, which I feel sort of slightly. I have a constant kind of internal, almost a battle of like thinking I ought to know myself better than I do. I'm 52 years old, but at the same time thinking I think I actually do know myself. I just struggle to articulate it, if that makes sense. Um, I don't know. I think I'm a work in progress. Is probably how I would define myself. I'm learning boundaries better and to know who I am as a writer and as a person. Is that what you meant, or did you mean to me to say like, yeah, I'm a writer of
No, in fact,
psychological
that's what
thrillers?
yeah, that's what we didn't want, and it's
Right.
great to start with that answer because we kind of been discovering in a lot of these interviews about how people don't want to be boxed into that more resume thing, and it's actually quite
Mm.
difficult to introduce yourself without throwing yourself into some kind of category label or
Well, it's
something
difficult,
else. So
isn't
I
it? Because
like
that's
that.
almost the easy stuff to say. What you've achieved and where you live and whether you're married or not and stuff like that. That's kind of that's almost it's not meaningless, but it's almost meaningless. It feels
Yeah.
when someone's trying to understand who you actually are.
Well, which is
So
what we're going to
yeah.
be gunning for the rest of this interview.
Yes, yes.
Starting with question two, which goes right for it. So,
Okay.
could you tell us something about a key formative experience that you think may have shaped who you are today as this 52-year-old who's still discovering himself? And I know there's lots to choose from, but if you could.
Yeah, that again. That's very difficult to choose one key formative experience. I think um, it's interesting because a lot of who I am today, I think I am because of the way my father was with me. Um, he was very stick, not carrot. I mean, not physically, but he was very his kind of the thing that I was told over and over again is that I was useless and that I would never amount to anything, and that was his word. And it's really strange because even now, however many years later, the word useless really triggers me. I know trigger is an overused. I don't end up crying in a corner, and but it really is a word that I hate hearing, especially about myself. Um, so, I mean, there are a number of occasions when I can remember that. I mean, there's one that I do remember, and I don't remember. It's nothing specific about it. There's nothing particularly interesting about it. There's one time I was in the garden, and um, he was a man who believed, and I'm not saying this is wrong. Actually, he believed that kids ought to earn their pocket money. That so I got to get my 50 pence. I had to 50p a week. I had to clean the car or rake the leaves off the lawn and stuff. And I remember one time I was in the back garden and I missed a leaf. I'd probably missed a few leaves, but and I was told I was useless and I would never amount to anything. And so I think I know I carried that with me, and I know it's still there now. Um, and kind of if I fast forward, there was a time after I'd written my book, and I felt I was a successful author, and I kind of I'd achieved something. I remember my therapist saying to me, um, basically, I was kind of moaning about my dad and how he'd kind of hadn't been a very. I don't think that's a very supportive way of raising a child or telling them they're rubbish. Because I mean, he was doing it because he hoped that would drive me to achieve more and to um, so on. But and I remember talking to my therapist about that, and she said, "Yeah, but it worked." I mean, I'm obviously massively paraphrasing what she actually said, but essentially she said it. But it kind of you got to where you are, and maybe one of the reasons you got to where you are was because of that attitude that he had. And it's funny because I kind of really, inside, I really reacted against that. I kind of almost wanted to argue and go, but it's, but actually I thought, she'd probably spent a long time waiting for the right moment to introduce that idea to me, that actually, although his methods were perhaps unkind and would be frowned upon now, they did kind of shape who I became. I'm quite a perfectionist. I'm quite driven, I suppose. I'm quite, nothing is ever good enough, which is both a good thing and a bad thing, I think, in the line of work that I do. So I do think that those kind of experiences, and there were many of them. There were many of them when I was told I was useless and rubbish, I would never amount to anything. But I think they did give me, subconsciously perhaps, a drive to prove him wrong, or to, to achieve something that was, okay, I'm trying to avoid the word extraordinary, but I suppose that is the word I mean. That's something that is is not usual. It's not kind of, I didn't just want a normal life, I suppose, maybe. So yeah, maybe that was the kind of formative experience.
Mm. It's almost like a formative thread, or kind of, it's almost like a rudder somehow, this kind of uselessness. But also the idea of an extraordinary life is fascinating, that anything other than that perhaps might not be enough.
And I think it's, I mean, I don't know whether this is relevant or something you want to get into later or not, but I do remember there was a time, I don't know, it's probably, I can't remember exactly when it would have been, but it was after the film of my book had come out. And I'd been number one in the bestsellers. So by any measure, my book was, I was a successful writer. And I remember I was doing an event in Birmingham, which is near where my dad lives, and my father lives, and he was going to come, and then he couldn't come for some reason. And I just really remember, he'd never said he was proud of me. And I realized that was a lot of what had driven me to achieve what I'd achieved. And I remember it. I mean, maybe this in a way is a formative experience as well, but I remember exactly where it was. I was outside the Wagamama's in Holborn, walking. I don't know where I was going or where I'd been, but that's where I was. And I just, in a kind of quite unusual for me, spontaneous decision, just picked up my mobile and rang him, and I pretty much basically said, "Are you proud of me?" And he kind of fudged an answer, and I had to go, "No, I just need a yes or a no. I don't want your qualifications and I bullied him into saying he was proud of me. Which is it was kind of weird in a way, because I think by the time he said it, I didn't need it anymore. Maybe, I don't know. Anyway, yeah.
Don't ask that again, because that was interesting.
Yeah, did it land with you when you got him to say it, or you
did it land
maybe
with
kind
me?
of answered that?
Yeah, I mean, I heard it, and I think it's weird because I think I knew he was. He's just a man who is absolutely emotionally crippled, really, and I knew he would be unable to tell me, and that the best I could manage was. It almost felt like an exercise, just to kind of just to get him to say. I think it did land with me, but weirdly, when it did land, it didn't land as a surprise. It didn't. I still felt very I think I still felt very let down. I still felt it was a very basic thing that I was asking for. But I suppose it all kind of ties together, because there was this, he'd kind of, in a way, I suppose you could say, in a way, he kind of bullied me into doing really well. But I suppose the kind of the quid pro quo of that is that when I do really well, you say well done. You're not useless. I mean, that's what I wanted to hear, is you're not useless. I think that's what it really boils down to.
Yeah, I'm definitely putting a pin in that, because what you're describing, as you'll probably know from your own therapy, is how one develops their super ego, which often becomes a motivator for good or bad, and I'm definitely gonna we'll come back to that later.
So then, in terms of the surprising things that have happened in the course of your life, what's something unexpected that has perhaps altered your path? And it could be for the better or for the worse, but something unexpected that you experienced that shaped how your life course has run so far.
Well, I mean, this almost seems like a really easy answer, but well, okay, yeah. I was going to say the success of the book completely changed my life in almost every single way. Completely changed my life in a way. Completely, also, I think, completely changed. Well, at least massively changed who I am as a person. But that doesn't really feel like an event. That doesn't feel like an incident or I mean, it was unexpected. But that's the kind of time that kind of month when I'd written the book and my agent had sent it out to publishers, and the kind of the world just went, my world just turned upside down in almost every single way. Wow. It was both good and bad. It was good, but it wasn't necessarily easy. But then there's also me and my parents. I do think of my parents' separation as being quite a formative event as well. But that's also difficult to unpick because it happened sort of 2 weeks, I think, before my A-levels. And then so that happened in the May, and then in the September or the October, I went to university. And so everything was changing. It's difficult to say my life took this direction because my parents split, because my life did take a different direction. But of course it was going to. I went to university, I left home, so there was that. And then, I could go back further and say probably the realization, which was, but again, this is a gradual thing, but the gradual realization that I was gay was also massive, obviously a massive life-changing thing, but I can't point to a specific, that's not an event. Again, that's not an event. That's a kind of something that came to me over time.
It's kind of unfolding experiences somehow.
Yeah. So a lot of them, it's just a strange one actually, because, and this is also a theme in my therapy, I think. Quite often when I have therapy, I find it difficult to pin things to specific events. It almost feels as though I block them. I don't know whether that's a common thing or not. And not because they're particular. I mean, I haven't had any particularly traumatic, I know people who've found found dead bodies and things like that. And there's nothing like that, or
oh my God,
or
that's an interesting one to point to.
Well, no, I think it was just I'll just say that as a quick aside, because my cousin was being babysat by his who would it have been? An elderly relative, anyway. I think on the other side of the family, and that person died while he was in the house, and he was quite young, and so he was trapped with the body for a number of hours. I'm laughing; it's not funny. So, but nothing like that. Yeah,
but it's interesting, Stephen. I think it's another one we'll get into, in that I think often in people's stories it is about events, and often in reality it's not really about events. Sometimes those events happen, right? The sudden change in the world, but a lot of it, most things are slow burns. And when people go into therapy and expect to find the thing, right? This is the thing. I think it often is more as you described, that it's a process that becomes a thing, and it's narrative.
Yeah.
One follow-up question though on that and then we've got one more question before we go into the I don't know, more intensive interview style. But
it's feeling quite intense already, to be honest. But okay.
Yeah, well, we go for we start as we need to go. Yes.
Yes.
This is just you buttering me up. This is this is foreplay, right? Okay.
This is foreplay. Enjoy the foreplay, because you're about to get fucked.
I do hope our community folks will be like, yep, we signed up for this.
Yes. Was it unexpected? Because for a lot of people have unreasonable expectations about their book projects, right? And other people will completely not expect that what happened to you would happen to them. So was it surprising and unexpected that your first book became an international bestseller and then a blockbuster movie?
No, I always knew it was going to. No, yeah. Yeah, it was a complete surprise. I mean, you know, the whole, and I think it's probably even worse now, but certainly, you know, we're now into 2009, into 2010 when I was writing it. The constant kind of refrain that you hear about the publishing world is that it's incredibly difficult to get published. And of those that do get published, most people, you know, don't, I'm talking specifically about fiction here, but most people don't manage. Even published authors, the median wage is less than the minimum wage was in 1956 or something. It's like, it's not, you know. I think I was doing a course at the time, so I was presenting chapters of what became Before I Go to Sleep to my course mates, and they kind of were obviously enjoying it and felt there was a potential there. And so I suppose I thought it was my best chance of being published. Even that felt like it was not a 1 in a million, but it didn't feel like, well, no, it didn't feel likely. It felt possible, but unlikely. Mm-hmm. And then at each stage, you know, I took the book to the woman who became my agent, and I expecting her to go, yeah, it's fine, but it's not for me, you know, good luck. But she was like, no, it's fine. We still need some work, but blah blah blah. You know, she was excited by it, and so at each stage, kind of incrementally, I was waiting for the what's the word, for the dream to come crashing down and someone to go, no, actually no, and it didn't. So it was a kind of gradual realization. But to answer your question, no, I didn't expect it at all. It was a complete shock. I mean, there was one. So a good friend of mine who was on the course with, I remember somebody had come to talk to us about publishing and being published and the reality of it, and had basically said, you know, the chances of you writing a book which goes on to sell 1 million copies and be turned into a film, they pretty much word for word said this. The chances of you doing that and being able to then make a living from writing and not having to have a day job is almost zero. But Antonio and I had kind of in the pub afterwards, we're going, yeah, but I secretly think I might be one of the ones it does happen to. And I did say that, but I don't think I was being serious. Well, I mean, yeah, I was. Yeah, it was a complete surprise. It was a complete shock because I think it's almost like winning the lottery is not something you can expect to happen. Mm-hmm. No, it's not. Obviously, it's not quite like that, but.
Yeah, you have to do a little bit more than just buy a ticket, which I guess.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, I'm kind of doing myself a disservice there. I mean, I remember. I don't know if this is relevant, but I do remember going to my agent called me, and so she'd read the second draft that she saw of the book, and she said, let's have a meeting in the office. Now, I was slightly confused as to why she wanted me to go into the office, because I was kind of almost then still expecting an email saying, I don't think it's quite there yet. But she said, let's have a meeting on Friday. And I went into the office and she introduced me to the foreign rights director of the agency. And again, I didn't know why. I was literally remembered and not knowing why she was introducing me to this person. And then I realized that they shared an office. I was like, oh, that's why. But then he swiveled his chair around and started talking to me about, well, we'll take it out to France and then to Germany, and we'll take it out to Italy, and then we'll go to the Scandi countries, and we'll hopefully sell it in Japan and China. And I was thinking, like no one had ever actually said to me, we think this book can be published.
Wow.
and I left. Yeah. And I remember leaving the office after that meeting, feeling slightly like I didn't really know what had just happened. And I rang Nick, my partner at the time, and was like, I think they think that they might be able to publish it in more than one language. It was still. It's funny because I've started a podcast and we're just talking about imposter syndrome, and it was a real imposter syndrome moment, and I actually, thinking about it, I do remember the overwhelming feeling was that I'd managed to con these people into thinking I'd written a good book, which didn't go away for quite a long time, actually.
Well, I imagine with that message of uselessness you've been carrying around up
until
that point, it takes a lot to overcome.
Yeah. I mean, I do remember a very specific occasion when Claire, my agent, said to me, well, now we've sold the book for however much, however many figures. This sounds awful. However many figures it was, I can't even remember. But now, we'd sold the book for a relatively large amount in Germany, and then she said, and now we'll tell, I don't know, Denmark and France and blah 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 how much, and how much it's sold for in Germany, and that will get them interested. And I said, oh yes, then we can convince them that it's an important book. And she said, no, it is an important book. And it was completely like shock to me that this wasn't a game. This wasn't this ploy is working where we're going to, they think it's good and we're going to keep, She was like, no, it is good. I still found it very difficult to hear.
Mm.
So, yeah.
I'm curious, so to go slightly off piece here, earlier you were chatting about the change that it brought about in your life when the book became successful. And again, it's back to this point of, I guess, a period of unfolding, perhaps a particularly climactic chapter rather than a singular event. But I'm really curious what success means to you, because that sort of level of change where you talked about many aspects of your life suddenly turning upside down, from the outside looking in, it can be very tempting for folks who haven't had that degree of, let's say, success in inverted commas, because it's a lot more complicated than that. For someone on the outside looking in to say, oh, this is amazing, he's got his name up in lights and he's been one of these 1 in a million authors who does manage to have an extraordinary success with all the hard work that you put in. What was it for you? What did success entail for you, including those other parts of the life that got flipped on their head? So let's untangle that a little bit.
Yeah, I do. I remember as Claire started to my agent Claire, as she started to make deals in different countries, and then and they became big deals, and some of the publishers that were like, this is the biggest deal we've ever done with this publisher, and I suppose I realized the book was a success. Was it a success then? Because it could have. I think I was aware it could have still. They might have published it in Germany and nobody bought it. I think that's the thing. It was still all an uncertain and unknown what was actually going to happen. And I think I was mature enough to realize that was very destabilizing, and that there was a danger of me thinking, well, we've sold it to 28 countries now, so will I be happy? Will I define success as 30? And I think I realized on some, again, possibly subconscious level, that if I got to 30, I would just want to get to 35, And it is what happened. I was massive, I never dreamt I would even have a book published. I certainly never dreamt I would be at number 1 in the Sunday Times bestseller list. And I certainly never dreamt I'd be at number 1 for 7 weeks. But when it was 7 weeks, I wanted 8. And when something else was number 1 in the 8th week, there was an element of me that was like, which is kind of ridiculous. And if I could go back to my former, my younger self, and I'd go, well, what, you were being a dick if you 7 weeks is good, So, but I think I was aware of that. And so one of the things I did, which I was actually really pleased with myself for doing, was I took a bit of time to have a think about what I would define as success. What would be my definition? Because obviously the publisher, if they sell 2 million copies, they're going to want to sell 3 million copies. And it's never enough, it's never enough. So I thought, well, what will I? And I realized that really what I wanted to do was to have a book that people read. It wasn't even about how many people, or that, to an extent, it wasn't even about how many copies were sold, how much money was made, whether it turned into a film or not. Okay, because that was another thing which I never dreamt. I literally never dreamt would happen. And I remember thinking, success for me would be if I ever see somebody who I don't know, a stranger basically, I'm not related to, obviously, reading my book. that will be success. And I remember exactly where it happened. It was at Waterloo Station. I was coming, I don't know what I was doing at Waterloo. I don't usually use Waterloo, but anyway, I was coming off the train. Somebody was literally running for their train, but reading my book as they were running down the platform. And that was like, yeah, okay, that's kind of, and it's funny because people had sent me photos. Friends of mine had sent me photos of, they'd seen people on the tube or whatever reading my book. But that was obviously that did land with me, and it was a nice affirmation or a nice feeling. But when I saw someone with my own eyes, complete stranger, reading my book, that was kind of success. Was it enough? No, because you always, it's well, was it? Yeah, it was my definition of success anyway. Has that answered the question? I can't remember what the question.
It's fascinating, Steve, I think, because there's this one thing about big numbers, right? And how many countries, but actually it's a single person, like the reality of a single person reading a page that has a kind of impact.
And
almost like the other thing is kind of an idea. Of course, it's not an idea because a royalty check will then come,
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Can I let's go back? Sorry, no,
go on. Yeah. Well, I was going to say, it almost feels like an extrinsic versus an intrinsic validation. Like, I know they're both extrinsic in a way, aren't they? But kind of maybe because I never went into it to make money, because I never thought I would make money. So even though some quite large, they weren't actually checks, but some quite large metaphorical checks were landing in my bank account. I'm not saying that didn't mean it. Of course, that meant a lot because it allowed me to, live a nicer life and buy more things. And it was very real, but it didn't mean as much as seeing someone else read my book.
Seeing that. Yeah. I'll take succor in that, since my royalty non-check just arrived for the little book of Colin. It was for £56.
I sold for less than that, so swings around.
Well, believe it or not, mine are kind of a similar level now, so it doesn't last forever.
Right. But I can identify that satisfaction you're describing. But I want to go like way before that now, because we kind of have sort of an end point, which is still an open question, right? Like, when does it settle? When does it feel like success? What does success mean to an individual? What fixes the wound of the uselessness? But you weren't a writer. You had a different job, right? I think you were an audiologist. Is that right?
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Right. Yes. So you were you were an audiologist at one stage, and you chose to do a novel writing course. Can you just tell us a little bit about, like, again, not the kind of the motivation? So what happened in that you're doing a completely unrelated job? Something arises within you, and then you pursue it to the end, right? Because a lot of people will take a course, a lot of people will try to write a book, a lot of people. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
I mean, there are a number of things. I think it's probably important to say it wasn't just that I decided I would become a writer and then did a course. I mean, I'd written my entire life to a greater or lesser extent. It had always been there as an ambition to have a book published, to write novels. I remember, when I was at school and people would ask me, again, I think it's probably my father actually, asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I said, I want to write novels. And he said, well, it's not very, this is not bad advice, but it's not very stable, lucrative career. So maybe you should try something else. And so the kind of doing the science degree and then training to become a clinical scientist in the NHS and then doing that job, I was going to say it always felt like second best. That's not true quite, but it always felt like the writing was something which was there in the background that one day I would want to go back to. I'd never gave up that dream of being a novelist. And then kind of a couple of things, like I've never actually really told anyone this before, but I always really wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to be Kurt Cobain or Robert Smith, or I'm useless at playing the guitar and I can't sing and I have no musical ability whatsoever. So I don't know why I thought that this was but I think the reason I mention it was I think it was always there as I want to be special, or I want to create. I think it's more, maybe it's more about creating than being special. Or maybe that's just, I'm saying that because it just sounds cooler. Maybe I did just want to be special. I wanted to feel special. I wanted to be on a tour bus and have a door and fans and all that kind of stuff. And then I reached my sort of, I'm slightly joking, but like I reached my sort of mid to late 30s and a number of things happened. I kind of, my job in the NHS was becoming more and more grueling in a way, I suppose. It was taking more out of me. I was also, imposter syndrome there as well was becoming huge because, and I think actually I was a bit of an imposter, to be honest, because as I got more senior, more and more of my job became about having meetings with finance directors and I don't even know. And I was never very good at that. And I was never interested in it. So that in that aspect, I always did feel like I actually was faking it. The working with the kids, because I was in pediatrics, the working with the kids I was actually good at. And it took me a long time to be able to say I was good. I was good at my job. But I knew I was good at it. And I left every day knowing I'd done, I was good at my job. And I trained people and they, and I got a lot of pleasure out of that. But my job was taking more out of me mentally as well. And I just felt like I wanted to change. And then as I was getting older, I joked that I had a kind of a midlife crisis and thought, okay. The serious side of that is I was approaching my 40th birthday and, obviously 40 is not old by any means, but it felt like a landmark birthday in a way that I think when I was approaching my 30th birthday, I didn't feel that. I still felt like I had plenty of time to do anything I wanted to do. All the doors were still open. I could retrain to become whatever at 30. I didn't feel that at 40. It felt more like doors were closing and things were becoming, options were. I think it was just that time when I just realized if I want to do this, write a book. It's now. Yeah. I can't keep on going at some point in the future, because, none of us know how long we've got, but obviously the older you get, the less time you have. And I remember I kind of did actually quite clearly have this thought about, I don't want to be at the end of my life and look back at it and look back on my life and go, I always wanted to write a novel and I never did. Or I never really tried. I dabbled, but I never really put serious energy into it. Because I think it was also a kind of realization that if I was going to do this, I would have to put in what's the cliche, 5,000 hours or whatever it is that you need to put in to become an expert in anything. I kind of realized that I'm not just going to get up one morning and the words are effortlessly going to flow and then a book will happen. I'm going to have to work. So I kind of made the decision to put the writing more to put it front and center of my life. And it was in a way, it was a kind of, I still thought what I was doing was having a proper go so that I could look back at least and go, I tried and I failed. And then I went back to the NHS and that's fine. But at least I tried. It would have felt the true failure would have been not really having a go properly. And so that's kind of what I did. It was just something I kind of needed to do it was just a realization that I was on the track I was on was not the one I wanted to be on. If that makes sense. I was senior in the NHS by the time I left, and the next logical career step was for me to be the head of a department, which, and kind of in a weird sort of way, I realized should have been my ambition. It felt like the ambition I should have had, but I didn't feel it. And my partner at the time was like, but you can do this. And I was like, yeah, okay, but I don't want to. Yeah. So that was like, I kind of, yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, I can't remember what I was going to say. Actually, it was this sort of. It felt like a need. It wasn't even a need to publish a book. I was quite prepared to not have a book published. I would have been disappointed. Well, no, would I have even been disappointed? I don't think I was expecting it. I think it was more of like an exercise. I need to do this to prove that I've given it a go.
It's funny, as you're talking about that, two images come to mind. One is kind of the this image of climbing a mountain, and you're getting closer and closer to the top, and then you look out and you're like, hold on, this is not the mountain I want to be climbing. I want to be that one. And it's like, how do you get across? And I think sometimes with that analogy, my sense or my feeling is that nothing in life is really wasted. That if you're climbing towards the top of one mountain, it's rare that you have to then do a full descent to climb right from the bottom of the other. Often there are kind of like jumps where you're maybe climbing from a halfway point. So there's that element. But then also something else that you mentioned about the idea of this could be my next thing. Almost as if it's like you're walking down a path of someone else's life, and that if you don't attempt to walk the path of writing, no matter where it takes you, if you don't get your feet on that path, somehow it's a deeper sense of not having lived into some aspect of your potential.
Yeah.
And so like the idea of having a proper go, it's like, I have to commit myself to this at some level. Otherwise, in my dying breath, I'll be like, I didn't even open that door. What could have happened if I just opened that door?
Yeah. And it was a really strong feeling that I can't imagine what that would be like to look back. That would feel like the failure. Not having, like, writing a book that then didn't get published wouldn't have felt like a failure to the same extent. Well, no, it wouldn't at all, actually. Yeah.
Isn't it interesting, Steve? Like, isn't it interesting that when Natalie asked you before about success, and it was like the next country and the next country, right? Or the 2 million and 3 million. From your perspective inside the NHS, the definition of success is to have tried to to have succeeded in having written a novel, right? That it could have sat in a drawer, that you could have been an administrator, that you might not have been super happy being an administrator, but like you'd written a novel. And how like that, like when you were saying that, I was like, wow, so clearly the success happened long before you go into that, long before like foreign rights, right? So I'm curious, and I know we're kind of juggling a lot of directions, but like how do you make sense of the Steve that completed the task that he set himself, the commitment, right? And then that it actually did what nobody expected it would do, and that provokes, like, is it really a success, right? It's like a total paradox in a sense.
Well, I think maybe it's because maybe this all ties in together, because maybe when I went part-time in the NHS and I took my course, I wanted to write a novel, yes, but I think I often joke, people say there's a novel in anybody, and anyone could write a novel, and that's kind of true in the same way that I could write a symphony. It would be really, really rubbish because I have no musical ability whatsoever. But I could throw some notes down on and whatever, and call it a symphony. Can anyone? And so the question became, I want to write a good novel. I don't just want to write rubbish. And then the question becomes, well, how am I going to define a good novel? Is it when my mom tells me it's good? No, because I could almost literally write the phone book out and my mom would say it was gripping and unputdownable, because that's just the person that she is. She's a massive supporter, and she would never turn around to me and go, I didn't really like that, it wasn't very good. She just wouldn't, So then the question becomes, well, who do I want to tell me this is a good book? And actually, I'd forgotten this completely until just now. Before, the ambition was to see a stranger reading it on a platform or whatever. The ambition, I remember thinking, what I really want and need is somebody in the publishing world, or not even necessarily in the publishing world, but somebody who has some knowledge anyway, and who I'm not related to say, yeah, this is publishable. Even if it then didn't go on to get published, that would have felt like a success as well, actually. That's what I wanted, someone to say, you wrote a book and it's good.
That recognition.
Yeah.
Work, being good enough.
Yeah. And I'd completely forgotten that I remember that was the thing. It was, if someone reads my book and goes, this is publishable, you know, whether it got published or not was almost irrelevant. Because I wasn't expecting to be able to give up my day job or anything. Sorry?
Say that again.
I said just because I wasn't like expecting to be able to give up my day job or anything. So it wasn't kind of that kind of success, but.
You were saying something.
I was just saying there's something very quiet about that aim and how it meets something outside of all of the noise that often comes with imposter syndrome and numbers and comparisons, right? Even if you're on the bestseller list for 7 weeks and that's like a 0.05% chance that's going to happen, somebody's going to be on that list for 8 weeks or 9 weeks, right? So it's never going to be the win. But somehow this recognition, like I wrote a book that was good enough to be publishable. It's just like a quiet, it's just a quiet settling, like that can be all right,
Yeah.
So thinking then about motivation to take the part-time work, to cut it down a little bit, to make space to explore the possibility of writing a book. It's kind of, it's not an all or nothing, right, I'm leaving everything, jacking it all off.
Beautiful.
I'm going to take that again. Right,
no, we're leaving that.
We are not leaving that. We're not leaving that in. We are not leaving that in.
That can be for the outtakes, the DVD extras.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Outtakes. Yes, that will be the outtakes. So thinking about the motivational piece and making the decision to make space for you to explore what it is to write a book, going part-time instead of just saying, right, I'm leaving, I'm just going to go and commit all I have to exploring what it means to be a writer. What motivated you to make that first decision to say, okay, we're just going to reduce these hours so I can free up potential space for this calling? I don't know if you'd call it a calling.
Yeah, I think it kind of was a calling. I think it was a calling that was calling louder and louder, and that's kind of one of the things I couldn't really ignore it anymore. But yeah, it was again, it was a combination of things. I mean, partly it was I was in a stable and happy relationship, and that felt really important. Like I felt supported to do this, and also between me and my partner of the time, we were comfortable. It wasn't the financial aspect. I've never been, going back to my father. My father is very driven by money, in a very, I think, unhelpful way. But anyway, I've never been that person. So it wasn't that I wanted to progress through the health service to be always be earning more and more money. So that was kind of going on, that actually financially I am able to make these changes. I mean, when I went part-time, because I not only went part-time, I went from full-time to part-time, and I also went from a band 8, which is a very senior level in the health service, to a band 7, which doesn't sound like that much of a change, but actually I went to a relatively junior, it's a very backward step to do. I went to a relatively junior clinician. So my take-home pay kind of halved pretty much overnight. Almost, well, yeah, not quite, but almost. But it was, it's funny again, we were talking about pivotal moments and didn't think of any. This was kind of one as well. Another quite quiet pivotal moment. But I remember a few months before I made this decision to go part-time and really concentrate on the writing, I joined a writing group in Brick Lane, and we met in this, I can't remember what it was, like coffee shop, I think. Anyway, I only went about 3 or 4 times, but I do remember there was this guy there, younger than me, obviously very, very talented, and also very enthusiastic. He just seemed very happy with what he was doing. I mean, I don't actually know if he was or not. I don't know, but he seemed very confident about his work, confident about his writing, confident about where he wanted to be. It felt like somebody who was doing what they were born, was living out a fulfilling, But I do remember, I noticed that the sole of his shoe was taped on with gaffer tape. And that, for some reason, I remember it now, however, like 15 years later, because I do remember thinking, he doesn't have money necessarily. Like, I wouldn't go out. I would have gone and bought a new pair of trainers because I can afford a new pair of trainers. But he is happier than me, even if he has got wet feet, if it rains, It was about thinking this drive to always be earning more, to get the promotion, to move my way up through the ranks of the health service wasn't going to make me happy. And also that I could go part-time and still, I kind of, sometimes I feel uncomfortable talking about this because it's like I'm painting a picture when I say I went part-time and took a demotion essentially and halved my take-home pay. I'm painting the picture for like I was eating cold baked beans out of a tin, and shivering in a garret in Paris or whatever. And it wasn't that at all. I was looking at like, possibly we might not be able to go on quite as many nice holidays. I still had I was still earning a decent amount, and my partner was earning a good amount, so we were fine. It wasn't that much of a risk. I can't even remember the question now. I've thought for so long.
I guess it's kind of like that motivation but I think you're answering it though. That kind of that moment of seeing this younger chap with a gaffer tape, around his shoe, who seems to be living a life that is fulfilling and meaningful, and that there's joy there that's not attached quite so directly, perhaps, to financial progression and all these nice holidays. And then actually, when it comes to taking like something off your plate, or taking paying a price maybe for the access to touch that dream, that actually maybe it was a reframe, that money isn't the thing that you're going for in and of itself.
It was a reframe, else. Exactly. It was very much that. It was very much. I remember saying I am going to put writing front and center for, I think I said 5 years. I said, and then if in 5 years' time I'm no further on, or I don't feel I'm nearer to my goal of being published, or I don't feel I'm improving, then I can turn the focus back on and put audiology front and center again. I'll be 45, which is not, it's still time to carry on building a career. So it was very much a it was. And I think it really benefited me as well, because I didn't do it by halves. Like, I think I had tried before to I'm just going to set my alarm an hour earlier and get up and do some writing before I go to work. But probably because I'm not really a morning person, it just never worked. It never stuck. It just never stuck, because you know what it's like. Other stuff happens and your alarm goes off an hour earlier than you wanted to, and you've been out the night before, and for snooze a few times. I'll start the book tomorrow, and then tomorrow becomes next month, becomes next year, becomes never. So I think the fact that I didn't just kind of take a bit of a detour. It was a complete different path. I remember the very first day I went from 5 days a week to Monday. I think I was working Mondays, Thursday and Friday. It doesn't really matter anyway. The very first day it was a weekday and I wasn't in my day job. I remember really clearly thinking, today I am going to sit at my laptop and I'm going to write something. At least I have to, because even if the very first day, if I end up spending it watching daytime TV and masturbating, then that's a kind. Then that's not why I've done this. That's not why I've gone part time to watch Richard and Judy, or whoever it would have been.
Certainly not to masturbate while watching Richard and Judy.
Well, no, that was never really going to be one of them. But I very from day one I knew I had, and again now this is probably my father's influence actually, but from day one I knew I had to treat this as another job. It wasn't a hobby. I'd chosen to turn it from a hobby into a job.
Okay, Steve, I'm going to stop you there because there's two directions that we could take, right? Like, and I'm curious about both, and I think we can only do one, right?
Okay.
So, like, part of me really wants to ask you about how you did that and what processes you put into place and how, you got support to do that. I'm sure you probably spoke about that elsewhere. Maybe we can get you back at some point talking about writing process. But I really do want to get into the psychology of it because your father's come up so much. And what really strikes me, right, is this, and it's a really interesting like relation to Freud, which I can't help but notice because I'm a Freud nerd. But the main thing is that there's this kind of difference between calling, invocation, and what I would say like that there's also this wound. There's this wound of uselessness that you feel compelled to compensate for, right? So it's approving oneself because of this internalized voice. But there's also a vision that was there way before you were in the NHS, and that writing was always there, which feels like doesn't come from a wound. It comes from someplace else, right? Who knows?
Yeah.
So that's where things are kind of spooky. Now, the Freud reference is this. Quite famously, his father also told him that he would amount to nothing.
Right.
And also quite famously, you might not know this, but the book that launched his career, The Interpretation of Dreams, was published when he was 40.
Wow.
Okay.
So,
right.
And
I knew I had something in common with Freud.
See, there you go. And he had a career as a neurologist until then. He was dissecting newts. He was working on aphasia, quite famously, working in cocaine and that sort of thing. But it was the interpretation of dreams that started psychoanalysis as a thing. So Freud, as psychoanalyst, started at 40 until he died at 80 something, right? But very similarly was motivated by, and he says in his own words, motivated by his father's comment that he would amount to nothing. So I know I'm kind of throwing a lot at you, and Natalie talked about our questioning technique and that we throw too much at people and don't give them a direct question. So I just failed that one straight away. But do you think that maybe you could say something about, and I know you're saying you're still learning this kind of thing, but how your vocation, let's say for lack of a better word, how your vision to need to be writing something, the meaning, the fulfillment side, sits next to the wound side, right? Where also the imposter syndrome sits and the am I good enough still arises. Are these things that work in tandem? Do you struggle with being motivated by one towards the other? It sounds like you felt like that uselessness was a great motivator for you, but it also sounds like it was a painful one, and whether you could have been motivated without that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's only after the fact I can look back and realize it was a motivator. Because I think it was filtered through, because I internalized it completely and I completely believed it. And so that turned into quite a severe self-loathing. I think that's probably an exaggeration. Self-loathing is not perhaps right, but I didn't like myself. As a child and a younger person, I couldn't really see why anybody else would either. And so I think that kind of, I think all that kind of went into the mix along with my sexuality, and I struggled with that for a long time, to come to terms with it, to be open about it, to be proud of it. Certainly took me a long time. So that was in there too. Kind of, I'm an only child, so with parents who, my dad is a very complicated person, not a happy person, his whole family are strange, I mean, we could do 90 minutes on that, but that's obviously not particularly interesting. That also all kind of fed into. I was also, you know, I come from a working class background. I kind of, on some deep level, kind of knew it was the place I grew up was somewhere I was going to have to escape. I was bullied at school, rubbish at sports, bullied at school. It just kind of goes on, and it kind of all created this sort of, in a way, it was almost a kind of like life is shit, but it's what I deserve way. I mean, that's not well, I said it though, didn't I? So obviously it's there somewhere. But it was more, I think it kind of all went into the mix. And I kind of felt like maybe as I began to develop more confidence and I began to like myself a bit more, and I began to have friends and start to conquer that, I kind of then felt a need or a desire to, I don't even know what I'm saying. What am I saying?
I'm hearing you say that this pain, even though it was outside of your awareness, was actually a very strong motivation for you.
Yeah.
You really, you had to, on some level, I don't know, in the health striving way, prove to yourself or prove to others that wasn't true. There must have been something that said,
yeah, I think I had to prove to it. It's funny. I think I think what I was maybe getting at was I reached some point where I kind of realized I had to either prove to myself that I was not better than other people or anything like that. I'm not saying that at all, but better than I thought I was. That I was not useless. I was able to achieve things. I was able to to build a life and to do something with my life. It almost felt like I had to make that choice, or the alternative choice was to do essentially what my dad did, which was to decide that he would live out his years being bitter and twisted and cynical and hating everybody and everything. That felt like my choice. I can be quite a black and white person. It did really almost feel like those were my choices. There was no middle ground of just like living okay-ish kind of. It almost felt like it kind of felt like I wanted to do something really big.
It was a fork in your road.
Sorry?
It was a fork in your road.
Yeah. I mean, I can't put a finger on when it happened. I think it was a gradual thing, perhaps, or a thing I struggled with for a long time. But I've always felt kind of driven to kind of to do something.
It's interesting just how they sit on top of each other, because you could say, this is where you get a big difference between what I would call like process and content, right? That to get, to have to lead your own department in the NHS, for example, for some people would answer that question, right? Like that proves I'm not useless, and I've done the conventional thing, and I've arrived. But for you, and I guess this will continue to be things we explore in lots of these interviews, is that there was a unique expression that was outside the conventional route that was going to answer that question better than the route you were in. And something something inside you knew that, like, it sounds like very deeply, that you made a 5-year commitment. And at that stage, the commitment is to have written something that was good enough, not to have written something that did what it did. It's kind of profound, Steve, when you think about those two elements.
And I think that even though I found it a very uncomfortable thing to hear, when my therapist said to me, your father's technique, or I'm sure it wasn't a technique he sat down and thought came up, but what he did create did drive you to do something which has been extraordinary. It's true. I mean, I don't know. I was going to say, I wish he hadn't. I wish he'd just been a nice, normal person who sort of told me that I was a good, whatever I did was good enough, and he loved me anyway, and blah blah blah. But then I probably wouldn't be sitting here now talking to you about a book that I've written. and that was a massive success, I don't know what I would be doing. But then maybe I'd
We'll
be
never
equally
know.
happy just doing something else.
Yeah.
No one ever knows.
No.
I guess my suggestion, well, I don't know if it's a suggestion, but sort of that internalized voice that all of us have to some degree, just different for each of us. Just being able to identify that doesn't need to be satisfied anymore. It's so, it perpetuates itself. We always struggle with it. We take it too seriously, right? But it's sort of like to really see, we get into a cycle, I think, of keeping on having to answer it and to find something that fits.
Yeah, which is interesting, isn't it? Because I think that's one of the things I maybe struggle with now, perhaps, is that, to use your mountain analogy, which I really liked, is like, it feels like I climbed to the almost top of one mountain, then realized I wanted to be on that mountain instead, did what I needed to do. And now in a way, I got to the top of that mountain. So it's like, I not only identified the mountain I wanted to go up, which many people I imagine don't ever really know, but I managed to get to the very top of it. And then it's like, now what? What now? I mean, and that's, I think that's what I now struggle with, is like, it's not enough. I mean, it is enough, but also it's like, I don't want to just sit around now on the top of my mountain.
But maybe then it becomes less about climbing mountains and more about presence and awe, which I know might sound a bit odd, but when you get to the point and you know that you've been able to do it and you've walked into the path of that creative calling, and I don't know what language you'd put to this, but your heart knows that it's possible. You've satisfied on these different levels that we've been talking about. You wrote a book, you gave yourself some time, you committed yourself to this dream, this beloved calling that you had since you were young. And then all of these other external accolades have come as a result of that. Then maybe the question is less about the goalposts moving, and it's more a deepening into what is it that's at the heart of that creative calling that so captured your imagination, maybe you were born with or whatever, and how do you connect with that? And that relationship may change over time. Maybe it's that you then, from your vantage point on the mountain with this extraordinary vista and all of the experience that's taken you to that place, maybe it could be sharing that with others. Maybe it's teaching. Maybe it's there's so many different ways, but there's something about that connection with that source point within you that's going to be in constant exploration and development and dialogue. And maybe
I think
is...
Yeah, you're right, and I think I'm now on the journey I'm on now is to make it more about the work that, I mean, it always was about the work that I'm doing, but to find my joy in that, not in external success or whatever. So I remember I did a couple of years ago, I was working on a book which wasn't going very well, and no one seemed to like it. Well, I mean, yeah, I'm exaggerating, but crucially, I didn't either. I was staring down the barrel of maybe another 2 or 3 edits of a book that I wasn't really enjoying and didn't really. I was writing it for other people, publishers, basically, and I was like, I'm not enjoying this, and so what is the point? And it really felt like there is no. I may as well. What's the point of climbing this mountain if I'm going to actually? It's got me to a place where I'm not enjoying the actual work, the actual creation. So I think that's where I am now. Is kind of I love writing again now. The thing I'm writing at the moment, it might be no one else likes it, but that's almost not important. It's funny in a way, isn't it? It almost feels like I've gone full circle back to, I want to write a book that is good again. And it would be nice if someone else said it was good as well, obviously.
Well, I guess the wonderful thing about life is it never just stops when you're done, right? Like there will always ask of you, show up for the next thing, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't solve it with by ticking a box, even if it's an extraordinary one.
Yeah. I don't know. Because, I certainly have family members who seem, well, but yes, seem content with kind of doing their work and then coming home and having their dinner and watching TV, and then that doesn't feel like enough for me. I'm not saying I'm special and it's inferior. I'm not saying that their life is, I kind of envy them in some way.
But I think that there's also that creative restlessness, and I don't think it's necessarily just for, just within creativity. You see it with people who are athletes, or you have family members who are surgeons who at age 70 plus are still climbing their mountain. It's exhilarating to them. So it can be anything. But I think when there's this creative restlessness and that sense of, I want my life to be extraordinary, whether that's in grandiose, externally kind of explicit ways, or it's more a quality of how you're spending your time. Maybe that doesn't leave us. Maybe it just shifts, and that's all right too. And maybe also now kind of, I know we're going sort of into deep territory again, and we do need to think about closing this really wonderful conversation. Do you want to take a lead on the closing questions? Pick a place.
Oh, what, for the quickfire close?
Yeah.
Which isn't quick. Okay.
Yeah. So these are short form. Well, we ask questions and they're quicker answers, right? So just maybe a couple of sentences max as we kind of like start to jump into out of the depths, which you've taken us to really, really well.
I'm good at taking people to the depths, believe me.
Yeah. So just a really simple, how are you feeling in this moment right now after our talk today?
It's been really interesting. In a way I wasn't necessarily expecting. Sorry, no, just that's not no shade. That's not a read, but I was. It's been interesting to kind of think about these things and how I think these are all thoughts I've had. Most of the things I've talked about are thoughts I've had before, but I've never strung them together and realised, perhaps to such an extent, the cause and effect of what my dad was like and how that led to this and led to that and led to the other. So it's been really interesting.
Is there anything that kind of maybe you learned about yourself today when you said something like, oh, I didn't realise I thought that or felt this? Or has it been more a kind of a making out loud, like putting out loud some of the ideas you already had and the sensations and recollections you already had?
It's been a combination. I think it's funny. Yeah. Okay. This maybe is more of an answer to the question you asked before, but I almost feel slightly warmer towards my father today than I did 2 hours ago. I always have kind of felt a sympathy for him. I think he's a product of his generation and his, as we all are, and his background. But I realised that, the way he was kind of has helped me to become who I am, albeit in a way that he maybe wasn't anticipating himself. But
that's a pretty extraordinary outcome, I think.
Yeah.
What you shared. Yeah.
Yeah.
Steve, if you could go back and say something to your 10-year-old self, what would it be?
I find that really difficult but what I would want to go back and the gist of it would be just try and learn to like yourself. Eventually you will. The sooner you do, the easier things are going to get. You're not that bad, I think, is what I would say.
Yeah.
No, I think I would say, it would basically be along the lines of, you struggle, but you are in quite a difficult environment, your parents and your sexuality and all of that kind of stuff, and you're doing all right. Because I always felt everything was my fault.
Well, what do you think he might want to say to you now?
Haven't you done well? Look at that.
What a joyful interaction.
Probably I would want to tell myself not to take everything so seriously all the time.
Oh, wait, you'd want your 10-year-old self to tell your 52-year-old self, don't take yourself so seriously all the time. That sounds like great advice, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, so more practical now. If you were to give one single piece of advice to someone who is in a working life that isn't speaking to their, say, grander vision or vocation, what could they take from you to move forward, do you think?
Well, I think one of the things that possibly the thing I'm most happy about is I don't intend to retire. The thought of retiring, I'm fortunate that I found a job that I want to do for as long as I'm able to do it. And I think whatever that might be, whether, you want to be a surgeon or whatever, whatever it might be, try and find a thing that you can imagine, the thing that you do for the joy of doing it, and you don't want to stop doing it. And it's not about the rewards it brings, financial or otherwise. Well, I suppose the rewards should be because it makes you feel fulfilled. But that's, I think that's probably what I would do. Yeah.
And so thinking about resources, things that have moved you, music, books, films, is there anything that springs to mind that you would recommend people look to for inspiration of some kind?
Oh gosh. Well, I find it difficult to recommend it because sorry?
Apart from your own fabulous works.
Well, no, I mean, because it's like, that's not, I don't know. It's because everyone's different, I could say the music of The Cure inspired me, but then other people might bloody hate The Cure and think that would be the last thing they would find inspiring. I don't know. This isn't really. I think it's more of a general. I mean, this maybe ties in with more of a piece of advice of just absorbing stuff. I think I kind of forgot for a long time actually how important it is to be out in the world, experiencing the world, whether that's through books or galleries or TV or films, and everything. I is just to remain curious. But that's not really like
impacted by stuff.
Yeah. But that's not pointing anyone to a specific thing and saying that I find that really inspiring.
Well, I can get behind The Cure.
Okay, good.
Okay, as we kind of really close up now, is there a question you wish we'd asked you and that we didn't, or is there something that you'd like us to know that we didn't get to?
I don't think there is really, no. No. I think, it's been a very profound, enlightening experience.
I'm glad.
I mean, I suppose we didn't really talk about my mom. If my mom ever gets to hear this, she'll be upset that we didn't talk about her. But that's because everything's fine there, She taught me to love books, so she did at least as much as my dad did. She was the carrot and he was the stick. Maybe
a conversation for the future would be interesting about how those two influences, one which feels a little bit maybe softer or sort of less concrete in some kind of a way, but maybe quite profound and deep.
Yeah.
Could be another conversation. Yeah.
And so what have you got coming up next that you might want to share with people? Is there anything you're looking forward to that the listeners might want to hear about? I
am looking forward to continuing to write. I haven't got a date for a new book yet, but I'm also writing I'm doing a kind of an experiment on my Substack where I'm uploading a chapter. Well, at the moment it's a chapter every 6 weeks, so it's agonizingly slow. I'm hoping to put my foot on the accelerator on that quite soon. But yeah, I'm going to Iceland in November to do Iceland Noir Literary Festival, which I go every year. It's a lot of fun. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm up to. Just plodding on,
Sounds like some wonderful adventures.
Yes. Yeah. And if people are interested in your Substack, we'll definitely put that in the show notes. They can
okay, great. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And I'm also doing my own podcast, but it's very different to this.
But what's it called, and where can we find it?
It's called Let's Get Lit. So we're a friend of mine, Will, who's another author, and it's quite interesting actually. We basically realised that we are both so hilarious when we have a chat in a pub that we should record this and put it out there. And podcasting allows us to do that. So it's reading, writing,
we had a
drinking.
Similar conversation.
Yes. Maybe we should join forces.
Yeah, but it's interesting because I think the flip side of it is we're both coming at things from quite different angles. In terms of I have had massive success, and he's had less success, but is critically acclaimed, and so we both have a kind of slightly different but also surprisingly similar takes on lots of stuff to do with what we do. So I think it's interesting, but then I'm biased because I think I'm hilarious.
Right.
So that's the other thing I'm doing. Yeah.
Well. Well, Steve, I know it's in the title of our podcast, Time to Show Up, but really grateful for you showing up as authentically and as deeply and honestly as you've gone with us today. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you and discover that stuff together. So thank you so much.
Thank you very well. Thank you. It's been, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
It's been a great pleasure.